Very warm welcome to the visitors in the gallery who have travelled especially to be here with us today, some of whom live with the daily reality of what we're about to discuss. On the 27th of September, under order of business, I read out the names of the 10 people who tragically died in the Carrick Mines fire, and I called on the Government as a matter of urgency to prioritise the issue of overcrowding on halting sites and to respond to the mounting international and moral pressure for action. I'm glad, Minister, that you've been able to come before the House to respond to these matters of life and death. And I want to begin by asking you directly, will the measures outlined in the report in the National Directorate for Fire and Emergency Management prevent more unnecessary and tragic deaths? And whilst local groups acknowledge that work has been done, as you outlined here this afternoon, the consensus is that travellers are still not safe in their homes. The response to Carrick Mines needs to go much further, beyond fire alarms and fire blankets. We need to tackle the underlying causes, like chronic overcrowding. And until that is addressed, I believe many halting sites aren't safe places for men, women and children to live. The report on programme to review and enhance fire safety in local authority provided accommodation notes that, and I quote, "Protecting people from fire is particularly challenging in the confined and cramped conditions that families living in caravans or non-standard accommodation may find themselves. This challenge is compounded by overcrowding. In the report, separation distances were identified as an issue of concern in 57% of sites. The numbers of families forced to share accommodation has increased from 663 in 2013 to 862 in 2015, and there are 534 living on unauthorised sites. That's over 4,000 men, women and children. This overcrowding is a direct result of policy failures and neglect. The state has a duty of care to travellers, and that duty isn't being fulfilled. Successive governments have failed to provide and continue to fail to provide adequate housing and accommodation for travellers. And it's not just me that's saying it. It's not just Irish travellers that are saying it. And it's not just the traveller groups that are saying it. The eyes of the world are on us and on our treatment of travellers. The eyes of the world are not going away. In the last year, we've had 2 landmark judgments, one from the European Commission of Social Rights, a body of the Council of Europe, and the other from the European Commission. In May, a collective complaint, which is a form of class action, was taken by European Roma Rights Centre, supported by the Irish Traveller Movement, against Ireland to the European Committee of Social Rights, a body of the Council of Europe. The landmark judgment found that the government is violating travellers' rights in 5 respects under the social chapter. The Committee of Ministers to the Council of Europe adopted those findings on the 5th of October. I ask the Minister now how he plans to put into effect changes in policy and practice in the light of those findings. They cited some key grounds: insufficient provision of accommodation for travellers, that many sites are in inadequate conditions and that there are inadequate safeguards for travellers threatened with eviction. The committee noted that of the 1,000 transient bays identified as needed in a 1995 task force, there are only 54 in existence, and not all function as proper transient sites. 54 out of 1,000. The second judgment came in recent weeks from the European Commission Directorate General for Justice, Consumers and Gender Equality, who are threatening infringement proceedings against Ireland for our treatment of travellers. And I understand that officials from the Commission are here this week on this very matter. And I would be interested in the Ministry's response to the European Commission's inquiries. The damning remarks from the European bodies have been echoed by Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. The question is, Minister, is the government listening now? I fear not when we examine the actions of recent governments. The budget of traveller accommodation is a welcome €9 million next year, but it was €40 million in 2008. So from 2008 to 2014, 92% cut. Minister, name another group that suffered a 92% cut in support during the financial crisis. Let's remember that there was no traveller in the Cabinet when our country went bust. There was no traveller on the boards of our banks when they went bust. For those who might accuse me of going off topic, I am not. Recent governments used the cry of the crisis to disproportionately and unfairly cut funding for traveller accommodation and supports. As a result, we have halting sites that are death traps. No one deserves to live in such circumstances, and no one deserves to die like the people in Carrickmines died. At the same time that government was cutting funding, some local authorities, as has been mentioned by other senators, were underspending their traveller accommodation budgets to the tune of 36%. And whilst there were thousands of travellers in need of support, this amounts to a damning disinvestment by the Irish state in the travelling community, and it is having a devastating effect. Minister, in our home city of Cork, there is a halting site in Blackpool called Spring Lane. It was built for 10 families, but now houses 30. Many families remain without water or toilets. Some continue to live in old, damp, mobile homes. All families live with daily overcrowding, and the almost 100 children on site continue not to have any place to play. We know there is a direct relationship between the quality of housing and health and safety. Traveller infants are 3.6% more likely to die, 3.6 times more likely to die than infants in the general population. The suicide rate in male travellers is 6.6 times higher than in the general population. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who works in traveller health last week, and she was mentioning in the last weeks in Cork 3 deaths from suicides in weeks. In 2008, the life expectancy for traveller men was 15 years shorter than for settled men, and a decade short for women. And as we all know, 10 people died in the fire that triggered this report. We are shaving decades off people's lives by not providing them with adequate and safe homes. Minister, travellers experience marginalisation, discrimination and racism on the basis of their ethnicity every day. It is time to respect this distinctive culture that can be traced back to at least Tudor times. A core part of that culture is expressed through housing. Living in a caravan and moving about is an integral part of travellers' ethnic identity. This ethnic identity was superbly explored in the recent RTE series John Connor's The Travellers. We must recognise that identity and provide for it. We must also accept, as the European Commission noted, that travellers are the most marginalised community in Ireland. And yet, 2 weeks ago in the Dáil, the Criminal Justice Bill was supported and moved to committee stage without their distinct reference, as their ethnic minority status is not recognised by the state and therefore will not benefit from automatic inclusion in proposed bills. For me, this is a matter of conscience and of rights. The current situation is intolerable. It is shameful. Urgent, meaningful action is required to remedy the situation for travellers in Ireland. And whilst the Action Plan for Housing and Homelessness Rebuilding Ireland is a very commendable and ambitious plan, it is short on specifics in relation to traveller accommodation. Rebuilding Ireland commits to expert independent review by the Housing Agency, which is needed, but the plan doesn't reference or recognise the scale of the issue that needs to be addressed. Travellers need to know when overcrowding will end, how much will be spent on traveller accommodation, by when, by who and where. And can you confirm that the promised review in Rebuilding Ireland will, at a minimum, reinstate traveller accommodation funding to 2008 levels? And that's 40 million, not 9 million. It's going in the right direction, but it's not enough. Increase the provision of appropriate resourcing of accessible, suitable and culturally appropriate accommodation. Support traveller nomadism with well-managed and serviced transient sites, and introduce a moratorium on evictions. And given that there are successive failures of leadership and political will at local level, consider a new independent statutory national traveller accommodation. We must never again lose 10 Irish citizens to fire like we did in Carrickmines. We must respect Irish travellers in word and deed, and we can and must end the marginalisation. We must end the causes of early deaths, ill health, mental and physical. We must end overcrowding through properly resourced housing. We owe this to the 10 people who died last year in Carrickmines. We owe this to the thousands of Irish travellers desperate for a decent home and a decent life, and we owe this to ourselves to make our country one that cherishes us all equally, and we owe it as an explanation to a world that is watching. Minister, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to hearing your response.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Landy.